20th century, the prevailing scientific model for Venus described a wet, tropical planet. Because the cloud cover was so dense, astronomers assumed the surface was shielded from the sun, creating a humid swamp, potentially capable of supporting life. This assumption was so embedded in the mission planning that early Soviet probes included sensors specifically calibrated to detect water. The reality was the exact opposite. The atmosphere was not a shield. It was a lid that trapped heat, creating a runaway greenhouse effect with surface temperatures of about 475 degrees Celsius. The first few probes didn't just fail, they were physically obliterated by the immense atmospheric pressure before they could transmit a single image from the surface. This failure created a new consensus. Even if a lander survived, photography was useless. The atmosphere was 90 times denser than Earth's. Scientists predicted that little to no sunlight could penetrate that depth, meaning the surface of Venus was locked in perpetual absolute darkness. The Soviet engineers ignored this model. They equipped the Venera 9 lander with a floodlight, just in case, but they also programmed the camera to scan immediately upon landfall. The footage that returned proved the darkness theory wrong, but it was the later missions, specifically the panoramas from Venera 13, that sent back data no one can fully explain even today. The Soviet engineers were working with bad data. In 1967, the accepted model suggested the surface pressure of Venus was roughly 20 times that of Earth. This was high, but manageable, with reinforced aluminum. The Venera 4 probe was built to these specifications. It entered the atmosphere and deployed its parachute, expecting a slow drift down to the surface. It never made it. The probe stopped transmitting at an altitude of about 27 kilometers. It did not burn. It was physically crushed by the pressure, which far exceeded its structural limits. The atmosphere at that altitude was already surpassing the probe's design capacity, and it was nowhere near the ground. This failure revealed the scale of the problem. The pressure wasn't 20 times that of Earth. It was closer to 90. At the surface, that is the equivalent of being 1 kilometer underwater on Earth. The team had a limited window before the next launch opportunity in 1969. They could not redesign the entire pressure vessel in time, so they tried to bypass the problem through descent speed. For Venera 5 and Venera 6, they reduced the size of the parachute. The logic was simple. If the probe fell faster, it would spend less time in the upper atmosphere. Hopefully, it would reach the surface before the heat and pressure destroyed it. The plan failed. Both probes imploded roughly 11 kilometers above the surface. This forced a total redesign for Venera 7. The engineers abandoned the idea of a standard aerospace vehicle. They effectively began building a submarine. The new design featured a forged titanium sphere capable of withstanding 180 atmospheres, double the expected load. They removed almost all scientific instruments to save weight for the armor. The windows were removed. The solar panels were replaced with a heavy internal battery. Venera 7 launched in August 1970. Upon arrival, the parachute reefing cords melted, causing the parachute to fail during the final stage of descent. The probe didn't float down. It fell. It impacted the surface at roughly 17 meters per second. In mission control, the telemetry stream flatlined immediately. The mission was marked as another failure. It was only during a post-mission review of the raw radio tapes that an astronomer noticed a pattern in the static. The probe had not died. It had toppled over on its side, pointing its antenna away from Earth, but it was still whispering. By processing the noise, they recovered 23 minutes of temperature data from the surface. It was the first time a human machine had transmitted data from the surface of another planet. The data confirmed the surface
Ozempic or Mounjaro have done what diets and willpower have failed to do so far: make millions lose massive amounts of weight with seemingly mild side effects. More than 1 in 8 US adults have tried the drugs. For the first time in history, the country's obesity rate actually fell. Since obesity is one of the unhealthiest things in the world, this seriously poses the question, should we give these drugs to everyone who's overweight to spark a medical revolution like we did with antibiotics and vaccines? The obesity trap. At its core, being overweight or obese is a mismatch between how much you eat and how much your body needs. Eat more calories than you burn, and your body will store it as fat. Eat less, and you'll lose it. But just because something depends on what you do, it doesn't mean it's your fault. Your drive to eat is programmed by evolution and can easily hijack your conscious decisions. For most of our history, food was scarce, so when our ancestors found a calorie bomb, binging on it was the best of ideas. The more sugar, fat and salt, the better. Our brains are wired to love these foods. They bring pleasure, enjoyment and mental release. This helped us survive in a world where food was the most important thing to worry about each day. And then, the world changed overnight, and suddenly food was cheap, calorie-dense and hyper-palatable. Our ancient biology hijacked our modern behavior. Most of us can't help ourselves and overeat regularly. Today, over 40% of adults are overweight, and obesity affects 1 billion humans and kills almost 4 million annually. If trends continue, by 2050, 1 in 3 adults on Earth will be obese, and half of humanity will be overweight. Since being overweight is also shamed on top of being unhealthy, we try to fix our overeating behavior with all sorts of, well, behavioral methods. The world is filled with diets and healthy habits campaigns, but anyone who's been on a diet before knows that it's hard and no fun at all. Not only are you fighting your deep evolutionary programming, you're cutting down on a major source of comfort, social